I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're diving into the electrifying world of Rob Mango. He's an artist whose life in New York City unfolds like a masterpiece. His book is a masterpiece in and of itself. It is called 100 Paintings, An Artist's Life in New York City. It is a visual odyssey blending art, history, and personal triumph. From the underground art scene of Tribeca to encounters with legends like Warhol, Scorsese, and Dylan, Mango's journey is nothing short of extraordinary. We're delighted to have this very talented author and artist join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Inks and Bindings for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing and beautiful book. The links are below the interview. Rob, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Logan, it's an extreme honor to be with you. Thank you very much.
The honor is all mine. Let's start by talking about your artwork. This
Okay.
book is just captivating. The art is mesmerizing. It really has the essence of New York City with a lot of imagination and creativity involved as well. What type of art is this? Is it cubist? Is it abstract? How would you define it?
I must admit that I've had a deep dip in all of those disciplines within painting and sculpture. You know, I've been doing this for painting seriously as an artist for more than 50 years. And you know, I'm a realist, but I have a very active imagination and as you put, fantasy aspect. And I think the audience looks into a piece of art with the desire to escape their own world to some extent. That piece of art also needs to complement their world in physical terms, but uh, uh, you know, art does many things for the human being. And I think I learned a lot from my audience where I have the ability after so many years to see the world through their eyes without losing my own vision.
Mhm.
And ultimately, what takes place in my paintings and sculpture is a merger between those two things. And if you look through my book, you're going to see uh, the first 5 or 6 or 8 pages are new works, which are something I invented, which is a three-dimensional painting.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of amazed that I have never seen anything like this before. I keep waiting to actually. Um, that I have an itch that I scratch in my work, which I found the audience also does, and that is a need for both 2 and 3 dimensions. And I
Mhm.
did it in these initial works. But you know, New York is described in my work in these large scale realistic paintings of the city, which have a metaphorical aspect. Like I did a piece after immediately after 9/11, after I came out of shock. Um, called Return to the City,
Mhm.
and it shows a an Egyptian god coming to New York and placing the World Trade Centers on a ferry, which is then dragged out to sea. Um, so I paint both realistically and phantasmagorically, you might say.
Yeah. And it works. It's beautiful. Like I said, I find it quite mesmerizing. It's as if some of the bronze statues that we see around Manhattan have actually morphed into life and have
Indeed.
actually become part of the beautiful cityscape. Let me ask you, you moved to New York City in 1977, I understand. Talk to us a little bit about how this helped shape your identity as an artist.
Well, I guess early on in the city of Chicago, and I was in my my mid to late 20s at that time, I realized that I was going to have to come to New York to make a mark. And I knew nobody here, and I guess I came with about 1,200 bucks in my pocket, and camped out basically when I hit the city. And you know, Tribeca was not Tribeca then. As a matter of fact, I was in the room when we invented the name, and it was warehouse space that was cheap, a former wholesale foods area, and I transformed one of those spaces into my studio.
Mhm.
And I had a lot of side jobs, which included I was a good carpenter builder, so I started making these empty lofts into beautiful spaces that the owners could rent. Eventually, lawyers and Wall Streeters moved into Tribeca. We figured out the name. And these same people that I was building fancy lofts for started buying my paintings.
Hmm.
And turns out that some of them were big shots on Wall Streets, and eventually their companies bought my paintings. And this process I'm describing took about 6 or 7 or 8 years.
Hmm.
And in the meantime, I met my wife, who walked through the front door of my studio, and we've been married for 41 years and have 2 children and 7 grandchildren. But
Wow.
uh, so yeah, I mean, I saw the evolution of the neighborhood, which has now turned out to be, somewhat well known.
Yeah.
And beautiful thing about it is Tribeca is it's it's Civil War vintage buildings. So
Hmm.
and the city realizing that it was a treasure kind of froze any evolution on them and re passed laws that they cannot be changed in color, size, shape. So we have great light because there's no real tall buildings in my neighborhood. But I don't know if I've answered your question completely, but yeah, I mean, listen, I felt like New York was a giant animal and I was on its back and it was just getting ready to kick me off
Yeah.
at any moment. And this feeling of fear and foreboding stuck with me for the first 6 or 7 years. And during those 6 or 7 years, I was running. I think I told you I was a runner, or maybe you picked
Hmm.
it up in my book. And I was running hundreds of miles in the city, both in Central Park and in the streets at night. And I was looking at the city, and just absorbing it. Because, when you're running, you're in oxygen debt and images collect in your mind, in your eye, your memory. And I had a love fantasy fear for the city, and it transformed into those initial paintings of New York. And
Yeah.
they were bought by lots of Wall Street companies. And as a matter of fact, one of them went down in the World Trade Center, which was a heartbreaker.
Hmm.
But so did Picasso paintings go down on the World Trade Center. But yeah, I mean, coming to New York back then was sometimes I look back on it and uh, that's why I had to write the book, because
Yeah.
it seemed like a worthy story. And I'm sure others have experienced something similar with New York.
Yeah.
And hope I answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think New York City in the 80s was still a bit of old New York. Like you
Yeah,
said, young people moving here from out of state could actually get a loft and rent a place. I mean, that loft today would be, $40,000 a month or something crazy like
exactly.
that.
You sound
So it
like a
was
New
still,
Yorker, Logan.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. I am a New Yorker. My dad was born on William Street. I'm a tried and true, born and bred New Yorker.
Wow.
And I often hung out in Tribeca and Soho in the 1980s. And
Oh,
the image that sticks with me is actually from one of the people you reference in your book, Scorsese's After Hours. Um, Kind of is a great time capsule film of what Tribeca and Soho
listen,
were like in the
that
80s.
was the period of time when I was hanging out with Marty. When
Yep.
he did After Hours. As a matter of fact, it was shot in Tribeca.
Yep.
Maybe you just mentioned that. But he used to call me up in the middle of the night because he stayed up all night and edited his movie. And, you know, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you and I probably passed each other on the streets.
Exactly.
I mean, Marty was a young man. He had black hair and tons of energy. And we used to talk about art. And he'd just burst into my studio and see a piece I was working on. He'd bring somebody and he would tell me to shut up. And he would tell these people what my picture was about. I
Wow.
mean, he's fantastic mind on this guy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he's all about the image. He's all about the visual. I had the pleasure of working with him on The Irishman. And I've got a long story about that, but I won't bore you with it. It was pretty funny. I had a vision for a scene one way. He had a vision for a scene the other way. He
yeah,
told me to do it his way. And later he called me 6 months later. He said, "You know what? I like the way you originally did it." And we put it
wow,
back into the film that way, which
wow,
was kind of fun, which is part of a genius too, is that he has a bold idea, but then he appreciates what another artist brings to it. And
yeah.
I thought that was
He's
wonderful.
such a storyteller.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Apparently, you are too.
Yeah, absolutely. It runs in the veins, I guess, no doubt. Talk to us about the Neo Persona gallery that
Oh.
you founded.
Um, you know, I was zooming faster than my career was, and Tribeca was now kind of filling up with terrific artists and painters who became my friends, and we hung out to all hours. And I finally decided I was going to open a gallery for them and myself. because Tribeca was not recognized as an art neighborhood. It was all Soho in those days.
Hmm.
And I had several clients who were all for it, patrons of mine who were buying my work. And I said, listen, I'm going to open a gallery and I'm going to have some of these artist friends of mine. And so for, I don't know how many years, 7 or 8 years, I exhibited nothing but Tribeca artists. And, um, I polished floors, white walls, great lighting, very professional. But this was an artist concept that I created basically out of my own pocketbook and then I had these patrons come in and buy the works of these guys, and it was just a fantastic chemistry. As a matter of fact, that's that Bob Dylan walked into the gallery one day, and that's an amazing chapter. But yeah, I don't know if I'm telling you enough, but I mean, it was it's an extraordinary experience, and the 80s in New York were incredible. I
Yeah.
mean, and that was had part of the 80s energy. And as a matter of fact, when Bob came into my place, he had just completed an album, and this was '89 in New Orleans. And he came up, and he had a satchel of drawings and paintings under his arm, and um, we had an opening the night before, and I had a mop in my hands. I was cleaning the place. Can I tell you the story?
Sure, absolutely. Love to hear it.
And I had this fabulous looking girl who was working behind the desk who happened to be my wife's sister. And so Bob comes in, he turns the corner, I got the mop in my hand, and I signal to her, and and Bob turns around, he goes to the front desk and starts flirting with her. Okay. He's an amazing guy. And he had a hood pulled over his hat, his hair sticking out, his nose. You could see the profile from the side. And he starts making some really funny comments. She starts laughing. I come over and, I we played it off. I didn't recognize him. I didn't play into the fact that he was who he is. And we started walking around the gallery, and his taste for art became very clear very quickly. And apparently, a friend of his, Bob De Niro, had sent him over to my gallery,
Mm.
and I had been to Bob's home, and so after a while, Bob encountered a painting that I did in a gallery, which was a satire on Wall Street.
Mhm.
Okay, it showed all the Wall Street banks as a strip mall on 14th Street. Okay, and
Yeah.
Bob was really amused by it because at his heart he's a satirist. I mean, he's a
Mhm.
poet first, and so we walked from my gallery over to my studio, and unbelievable things happened there. And we ended up walking around the neighborhood, and walking around streets of New York with Bob Dylan is a day in your life. Let me tell you
Yeah,
something.
I'm sure.
Everybody stops.
Yeah.
Ladies with baby carriages. And back then, the police were on horseback.
Yep.
They stopped traffic, everything. It was unbelievable. And the key is to just ignore it.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. And Bob and I got on great. I ended up, when he's in town, the limo comes up. We go to his concerts. I got to know one of his kids and his um, manager. I'm sorry, did I get off the
No,
track?
no, it's great. It's all fascinating stuff. And I think you're right on track. And I have the same intimidation sometimes when it comes to working with big stars. I'll work with Pacino, I'll work with Tom Selleck. And what I do is just what you do, treat them like anybody else. I'm kind
Yeah,
and nice to everyone. I
yeah,
treat them kindly and nicely as well.
yeah. Well, I'll tell you something. I, I could have had pictures taken with Bob. I could have done
Mhm.
all kinds of things, but I didn't. And we started just talking like artists,
Yep.
real quick. And he gave me some advice, which is some of the best advice I've ever had in my life artistically. I mean, not just because it was from him, but, and Bob, with your permission, I'm going to repeat that. He said to me, um, when you're working on a piece, don't overdo it. Get out.
Hmm.
Leave the life inside the painting, or you'll suck the life out of it.
Hmm.
I've kind of lived by that,
Yeah.
and that came from him. Um, So yeah,
So basically, create the work, don't overcreate the work.
yeah,
And if you overcreate the work, it might become with too much detail, too much,
too much polish.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. A little
The human
raw is
heart does not
better.
have polish. You know, the human sensibilities are raw and ragged. And if there's a little bit of that in the work, uh, there's a mutuality that occurs. And I mean, he
Yeah.
had some works under his arm. He put them down on my table. We looked at them. Um, and it was kind of an amazing moment. You know, he's a hell of an artist. He's a
Yeah.
great painter, you know.
I feel most people who reach that level of success
Mm,
are great in their realm. To be recognized as a Bob Dylan, as a Bruce Springsteen, as a Robert De Niro, I
yeah.
think they have that greatness. And I was thinking, as you talked about not overdoing it, it's like an actor, you don't want to over rehearse. That was one of the things I learned from Pacino is he barely knew his lines.
Uh-huh.
So he was recalling his lines like somebody thinking as opposed to somebody just tossing out lines.
Well, you know, part of genius is a split personality, you
Hmm.
know, and there's this character behind the scenes who knows what to do. He
Yeah,
doesn't have to be told by too much of a script.
yeah,
Certainly Pacino is that. Um, and it's funny, I have that split personality too, you know. I know what I want to do and I'll do a sketch, but then I'll stop because I don't want to realize the painting in the sketch. And then I'll just execute it in on the canvas, which is what's happening right now.
yeah.
You know, I'm working on a series, if I may,
Sure.
um, commissioned by the University of Illinois,
Mhm.
of their greatest Olympians and legends,
Hmm.
going back all the way to the first Olympic Games. And Illinois has had many. Um, and so I just finished two, and I'm working
Mhm.
on the third right now. Um, which is a little bit of a departure for me because, and it's almost a relief because the one thing that's consistent in all of these pictures is that the portraiture of the person and their physical body is presence. And all I have to do is really research or meet with them to find out exactly what they look like. Sometimes I'm meeting them 40 years after they were Olympians.
Mhm.
Um, but that's a fix, and everything else is my imagination. I don't know if you can tell. Can I take you over to one?
Sure, absolutely. I think I see somebody running hurdles behind you.
Yeah, that's
That's
Tanja Buford Bailey. She made
beautiful.
three Olympic teams and medaled in Sydney. And
Beautiful.
this is the uh, the professional golfer Steve Stricker,
Mhm.
who's an alumni of the University of Illinois. Thank you for indulging me on that,
No,
Tim.
no, I love it. Like I said, I was going through your book this morning once again, and it's your work is really, like you said, a beautiful combination of realism and fantasy. And I think that's where most of life is really led.
Yes,
Um, yeah, somebody who's
yes,
jumping hurdles like that, there's something magical about it. Someone who's,
yeah,
hitting a hole in one, there's something magical about it. And it's more than just mechanics, it's more than just musculature. It's that unseen element that you capture in your photo, in your paintings that
yeah.
makes it really, really
You
wonderful.
know, the audience has that in them too.
Mm,
The hopes, the dreams, the aspiration, and their own lives, they find parallels between the picture and the path that they walk.
yeah.
You know, it's a combination between fantasy, reality, uh, imagination, visualizing your future life. Then you walk the path to that point. Same thing takes place in a piece of art. That same chemistry and mixture. But you know, it's like I'm weird, you know. I got a lot from literature
Mm,
as in my life, particularly from science fiction, poetry, fiction in general. Um, and so when it came to writing the manuscript for my book, I couldn't believe how easy and fluid it was, you know.
mm,
Um, so, you know, I mean, to me, philosophy and psychology and visual art are bedfellows, you know.
yeah.
They're brothers and sisters. So,
Yeah, they absolutely complement each other, and one empowers the other, which is why filmmaking is such a big part of our culture and big part of our artistic experience as well, because it's the blending of word and image. Uh,
Yeah.
Want to ask you one question before we
Yeah.
leave you today. What advice would you have for a young person who's starting out with the same hopes and dreams and perhaps some of the talent that you had way back when in the 70s?
Well, I'll tell you, the talent and developing it comes first. I mean, if you've got something inside of you which is so combustible, you have to apply it in some physical manifestation, whether it be writing, filmmaking, painting, and evolve that. And that takes a good chunk of your youth. And then if you think you want to take it to the world, well, you do that, but you got to be ready to pay some dues, you
Yeah.
know, because an artist path is a tough path. And, the arts are changing so much now from digital technology. I mean, what I do with my hands that nobody else touches is almost a lost craft,
Right.
in the era of where even visual art is digitally created. But I'm actually kind of happy and proud about that. I'm fine with it.
It's good to be an analog man in a digital age. That's what I say.
Well, I'm going to use that. That's beautiful.
It's a good one. It's a
It
good one.
is.
The name of the book that Rob Mango has put out is called 100 Paintings: An Artist's Life in New York City. It is a visual odyssey blending art, history, and personal triumph. From the underground art scene of Tribeca to encounters with legends like Warhol, Scorsese, and Dylan, Mango's journey is nothing short of extraordinary. And this book is beautiful. Buy two, one to keep on your coffee table, the other cut out some of the pictures and frame them and put them around your house. They are wonderful. Rob, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
Logan, you are an amazing man. Thank you for bringing me into your world.
I appreciate that, sir, and I enjoyed being in your world for just a little while this morning as well. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.